think Rippling looks like an HR software company, and a lot of people are like, ugh, HR software, that's boring. We're really saying like, look, we have like a fundamentally new approach to how you should build software. And employee data is like a fundamental building block of sort of, I think, how a lot of software should be built.
You were talking about your 4 a.m. flights, right? Like came in at 4 a.m. India time, and you're leaving at 4 a.m. India time. I asked you a question, do you use melatonin to reset your sleep cycle? And then you told me something very interesting about an app.
I use this app called Time Shifter. It's basically, you give it your flight information and it gives you this whole recipe, like hour by hour, of like what it wants you to do. There's a couple different things. There's like using caffeine, wearing sunglasses, being in the dark, trying to be like getting direct sunlight, and using melatonin. And it sort of tells you hour by hour, like I followed this set of instructions on the way over. It was way easier.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to, I guess, the first episode of The Numbers Game. I just changed the name of the podcast on the fly. It used to be Open Conversations. Today I have Parker Conrad. Parker, it's an honor to have you on the pod. You have raised billions of dollars. You now run an $11 billion company. These numbers are mind-boggling for me, by the way. And you've not just done it once, you've done it twice, right? So you're the one person with multiple sort of successes at this scale. So thank you so much for being here in the first place.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm going to get straight to the questions. I'll tell you, these are all going to come from my own curiosities as a founder, right? I want to learn a lot of things. And there is this narrative in India of, this is a VC narrative of build one thing, narrow focus, don't do anything else, get really big at that, okay? And this was the prevailing narrative for about 7-8 years, right? The last 7-8 years. But in the last year or so, things have changed. Because people have realized India is not such a large market. But you have an interesting counterpoint to this, which is that all these very niche spaces have kind of been exhausted. And you believe in a completely different narrative, which is you got to do parallel things, you got to do multiple things, and you have to keep that experimentation bandwidth open as an early stage company, right? And you have a name for it. It's called the Compound Startup. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. So basically, my belief is that we've been building software wrong for the last 2 decades because everyone's been focused on these sort of very narrow point solution problems, particularly in B2B SaaS, which is sort of the area that I tend to know a lot about. And one problem with this is that a lot of the problem space has been exhausted. So, basically any vertical you can imagine, there are a couple different SaaS companies that are sort of going after that area. But the second thing that goes wrong with that is there's actually an opportunity. A lot of the biggest problems that businesses face are problems that sort of span multiple departments, multiple functional areas. They're problems of business process, decision-making, the way the organization operates. And to solve them, you really need to sort of operate like many of these different systems and get them to like work together in like a seamlessly kind of interoperable way. And so when you're building multiple products in one, there are a lot of product advantages that you have. Things are more integrated with each other, but also usually with like underlying business data. In our case, like employee data. You can go really deep on shared componentry. So Rippling, I sometimes say that Rippling's mission is to decompose business software into its constituent parts and then rebuild software in all these different verticals out of these underlying elements. And what that allows us to do is to go really deep on concepts like reports and permissions and workflow automations and approvals and other core primitives that you see again and again and again across a lot of different business software, and build those way better than point solution competitors would be able to afford to build them. So there are all these like I'm convinced that like the global like minima, the best products are the ones that are actually sort of all in one. And that's a way not just to sort of win a sales and marketing game, but it's a way to build better product experiences for end users.
Would you say the word for this, the common speak for this is a bundled solution? You're building a bundled solution?
So what I don't like about the word bundled is it implies that the driving force is the sales and marketing, the packaging. That you do have a bunch of advantages from a go-to-market perspective, but I think you can also build better products. Like I think that, a lot of times compound products they're not just, sometimes people mistakenly believe that you're selling good enough versions of these products, but you have these sales and marketing advantages because they're bundled together. I think there's an opportunity if you take the right technical approach to actually build products that are better. Each individual product is better than its standalone competitors, and you also obviously have these sales and marketing advantages from selling them all together.
But where do you start? Like, let's say you were starting Rippling tomorrow in a different space, right? Let's say you were starting in sales software, for example. Would you start with like a narrow wedge? Like play the story for me from the day you started Rippling to the point where you're like, okay, now we do multiple things. Or was it like day one, hey, we're going to bet here, we're going to bet here, and we're going to bet here?
I can tell you exactly the way I would build a Rippling for sales software. But there's a huge upfront investment. I think that, there are a few...
What would that number be if you had to put a number on the upfront investment?
Man, I don't know. I'm not sure I could put a dollar number to it. But I think what you need to do, the tricky thing, particularly on the sales side, is that you need to build the underlying platform. Like a lot of people have made the mistake of trying to go after CRM in the application layer. So they build this CRM application. But the way that you need to win in CRM is you actually need to build the underlying sort of platform system. So things like custom objects, workflows, configurable views, reports, dashboards, workflows, permissions, like all of that stuff. And you have to invest really deeply there because that's everyone that sort of tries to go up against Salesforce sort of crashes and burns because they don't do the hard work of building that stuff. They just build the sort of application on top. And it's never, without that underlying machinery, it's like never configurable enough. You can't dial it in enough to kind of get it right. The second thing that I think you need to do is one of the weaknesses, I think the sales space is a great example of an area where, because there are so many different applications you need to string together to run your sales organization, and they're not natively built together. They're connected via APIs, but these APIs are often just very thin straws to pass data between applications. And so if you had like natively built software, not just for core CRM, but also for call recording and transcription, what products like Gong do, for sort of email and sequence management, what products like Outreach do, for scheduling and calendaring, products like Calendly, Chili Piper, things like that. If you had like data orchestration tools that are often like add-ons to Salesforce to manage, lead databases and contacts and things like that, if you had all of those things in one system, it would solve an enormous number of problems for businesses that have struggle with sort of the way Salesforce is dependent on this ecosystem of sort of thinly connected services. Now, how do you build all that, all at once? How do you build the full platform layer, all of these different applications? The answer is it's like probably impossible. I don't know how you do it. I think that it's one of the things that makes doing startups hard, is because like doing a startup and making it successful is somewhere between completely impossible and just very, very, very hard. And between those two extremes, there's such a narrow ray of light that passes through. So I don't have the answer on how you do that, but I think that the big advantage of compound software businesses is like in so many places with software, the central question is like, well, if I build this, does it even matter? Will anyone care? And with a lot of sort of compound software products, the answer is very clear that if you can find a way to get there, it's superior in fundamental, profound ways. It's just really hard to sort of get there.
But it's against conventional VC wisdom, which is like, hey, build a Calendly competitor and then get really good at that. Don't touch any of the other verticals in the area. But you're saying that just go raise a bunch of money, build the infra layer first, build authentication and your views and stuff first, and then build these individual components on top. Think of Calendly as one thing your product offers versus that's the entire thing.
Yeah, because you look, if you can build a software suite that solves a fundamental business problem, which is like really managing the sort of the customer, the prospect journey, from like lead to like customer, and then the customer life cycle. You want to solve the whole problem, and to solve that whole problem, you need a whole bunch of different applications, and you need them to sort of be seamlessly interoperable. And when you try and string together a dozen different point solutions to do that stuff, there are always these interstices between the products that, where they don't quite fit together right, and you need a lot of human intervention to kind of make things work, and that ends up being, the central advantage of compound software businesses is that, those gaps sort of fade away when you're building these things natively on one system.
Interesting. So I think this is on the vision side of the company, right? This is how you've built Rippling. But I think all of this is built by talent. And you have a very special recipe / playbook for how you build an org. And one thing that Rippling is famous for, every podcast I've ever watched of Rippling, everyone I've ever spoken to is like, you hire the most number of ex-founders in the world. You put them all together. You have a playbook, and I'm hoping I can, tease out that playbook over this conversation. You take the founder, you say, here's the idea, here's the playbook. And then once that product is mature, you drive this fire hose of demand / distribution to it, and then that product starts working, right? We do this at a very small scale. We figure out this one small thing about YouTube. Like the alpha is, it's all about edit and packaging. People don't believe this, but it's actually a lot about just compressing that video from something that could be 20 minutes to 10 minutes, right? And then everything that you put away, it's your judgments depending on what you put away, right?
Yeah.
And if you can repeat this over multiple channels, which is what we've started doing now, then you have a playbook. And then now you're like, okay, what's the kind of talent that could be able to create this? So you've done the same thing, but you've done it in software. You pick up the most number of ex-founders. Curiously, I want to know what the playbook is.
Yeah, so the playbook on the hiring side is, we love to hire former founders. People who know what that grind is like, and they know sort of like how precious it is to find like product market fit. And there's like a hustle and maybe even like a desperation to sort of like trying to get something to work, because you need someone to kind of drive that internally. And we sort of say, look, this is the only place where you can be a founder and you can build a product where it's true that like if you build it, they will come. Because we really can bring a lot of, if you build a great product, we can bring a fire hose of distribution to it.
How have you built that distribution? Is it based on the existing Rippling user base and the connections and the network that you have?
We're really good at cross-sell. It's one of the things that's very unique about our go-to-market motion. So Rippling, last month did about $8 million in net new revenue just from cross-sell. So our ARR increased by $8 million just from a cross-sell perspective. And then we also did a lot of new logo sales as well.
For the audience, can you explain what a cross-sell is in your context?
It means selling new stuff to existing customers. So you already have some kind of relationship with a company. Maybe they're buying payroll from us. Maybe they're buying our IT products for single sign-on or device management, and we're saying, hey, look, you should also be using our recruiting software, our applicant tracking system, or we see that you have employees in India. We have an Indian payroll system, so even if you might be a US-based company, you can actually use Rippling to manage your employees in India, to pay them, to do all that kind of stuff. We handle all the money movement and taxes and withholdings and all that kind of stuff. And so we can sort of sell these sort of new SKUs to the same customers and deepen their relationship with us. And actually, it's interesting. We've built, there are a lot of things that we do from a sales perspective to make that work. One is we try and shard our sales organization. So we have, in addition to just the new logo, the AEs that sell Rippling, sort of like the overall package to new prospective customers, we have individual product sales organizations that come in that are focused on just one product, where we have like, our global sales team that sells global capabilities for companies that are, have employees, outside of the country that their headquarters are in. We have our spend management team that sells things like corporate cards, expense reimbursements, bill pay, corporate travel software. We have a team that sells our talent suite, applicant tracking, performance management, that kind of stuff.
And I have a question there, right? Like, sorry to interrupt you, but important question. This sales team, what are they doing on a daily basis? Like, what's the sales team structured like? What's a pod look like? And what are the activities they're doing? Are they going and meeting these clients physically? Are they sending out cold emails? Are they going back channeling through messaging saying, hey, do you have an intro to this VP? Like, how do you close a new client?
Well, so usually what an account executive is taking over once we have an interested prospect. So someone wants to get on the phone, learn more, take a demo. It's almost all inside sales. So it's
all marketing till that point, till the point.
It's marketing until that point. We do have an outbound sales motion that's a different team, SDRs, that do cold calling, but a lot of it is actually marketing driven to sort of get people to the point where they take a demo. And then what will happen is an account executive will get on the phone with a prospect and they'll sort of pitch them on the overall Rippling vision, because every client's coming to us usually with a very specific need. They'll say, man, it's a lot of work for me every time I hire a new employee to set them up in all these different systems that I use in my company. And I heard you guys have a solution for that. I know you guys also do payroll. I don't want to touch my payroll system. I'm happy with that. I don't want to move this other stuff, but can you help me solve this problem? And we'll try and talk to them in that call and say, look, this problem that you believe that you have around managing user access in all of your different sort of business applications, we can solve that for you. We have, an identity product that manages user provisioning and single sign-on across all these systems. But really, this problem at a more fundamental level, the problem is actually about the fragmentation of employee data within your company. That you have 20 different systems that need to understand who your employees are. And this is one symptom of that deeper underlying disease. And if you let us solve that for you at a more fundamental level, we could solve these like 15 other problems for you that you didn't come to talk to us about today, but that we could run you through the list and you probably have those problems too. And so frequently customers come to us with like one thing that they want, but they buy a whole suite of services because they buy into that vision. But usually they buy some, but not everything. And then what happens is then later on down the line, the other teams are sort of calling into them and saying like, hey, look, you guys didn't, are you interested? You've hit a size now where maybe it makes sense to set up like a recruiting software, for example. We can help you do that. Or it makes sense to set up performance management software. Are you interested in talking to us about that sort of thing?
So if I'm a founder and I joined Rippling today, let's say I built a company, it didn't work out. I've been through the grind for 3 years and I joined Rippling. And then I say, hey, Parker, I have this great idea for a Calendly competitor. These are all the benefits it has for enterprises. And I build that. Let's say you say, okay, and we build that over like, let's say a year. What's the kind of user base that Calendly-like product could get access to? It's about 1,000 people, 10,000
So it
customers?
used to be, I'll give you the progression. When we started doing this, maybe a couple years ago, we would launch products, and consistently the new products that we would launch would get to $1 million in run rate revenue in a year. Now, the products that we've launched most recently, like in the last year, 12 to 18 months.
Could you give me an example?
Of a product we launched last 12 to 18 months?
Yeah.
Well, one is our ATS product. So it's recruiting software for recruiting teams. Another is our global products that are for companies to manage employees outside of their home country. So things like payroll, benefits administration, local sort of compliance in those markets. Those products now, every single one of them makes it to $1 million in run rate revenue in month 0, like the month that it launches. And the record is actually our global products. When we launched them about 15 months ago, they went from 0 to 12 million in ARR in 4 months. So it was like literally this just massive uptick in a very short period of time.
And that's SDRs sending out emails, or is it just you have one central email list and you're like, hey, now we have ATS?
Well, so some of it is now, all of the new prospects that we're talking to.
Got it.
All of them now are presented with, hey, here's, are you interested in like adding a recruiting software? And many of them will say, actually, that's, I should add that on. Like that becomes a part of the package that they buy. But actually what a lot of it is like an internal ad system that we've built. That's basically, you can think of it as like the Facebook ad exchange, the way businesses buy ads on Facebook. And the thing that I think makes the Facebook ad exchange work so well is that the social graph is like the right underlying primitive for selling consumer products. So you can go in, you can target people based on their interests, based on all kinds of different things, and say like, oh, this is a good person to sell mobile phones to, for example. I actually think that the employee graph, the data about the internal organization, is the right underlying primitive for selling business software. And so we can target people very precisely, and we might say, look, here's a company, they just posted a job for someone in Bangalore. It's a US company, but they're looking to hire someone in Bangalore. Like we have like a whole suite of products for, payroll in India, for, managing employees in India. We should reach out to them and sell them that. Or, we can say, look, here's a company that just hired their first recruiter. They probably need, recruiting software. Or, they hit a certain size where, they maybe they have remote employees, but they they haven't bought our IT management warehousing software. So we have basically a thing that we call inventory management that gives you like basically a virtual warehouse. I mean, our warehouse is very real, but it's virtual to you, where when you terminate a remote employee, we send them a box and a shipping label, and they can put their computer in the box and it ships it back to our warehouse where we store it and clean it and wipe it, and so it's ready to go. And then the next time you hire an employee, you can just sort of choose that computer from our warehouse. We ship it back out to them. So if you have, maybe someone terminates a remote employee and we're like, how are you getting their computer back? We can help with that. Maybe you should buy this service. So those are the kinds of things those are all very marketing driven. We have like a whole like growth team that does, most companies, their growth teams are focused on using systems like, Google or Facebook or like other types of sort of paid marketing channels to acquire new logos, like new customers. We have a team that does that, but we also have an equally large team that just uses our own internal ad system to generate demand from existing customers for new Rippling products.
Got it. So give me some rough numbers, right? Like how many conversations are, let's say, the sales reps doing on a monthly? Like on average?
It depends a lot on the team. Because depending on the size, a lot of the sales teams are segmented by customer size and then by product. And so depending on sort of, reps that go after larger companies tend to sort of work with fewer prospects at a time. And, reps that work with very small businesses often do like a ton of these. It ranges, at the high end, maybe, there are 10 demos a month, of sort of new prospects that reps sort of take onto their calendar. At the high end, it could be, 35, 40.
Got it. And out of those 35, 40, you have maybe 3-4 conversions a month, something like that?
Oh, I think it's higher than that. I mean, we, for in our SMB segment, I don't know offhand where the conversion rates are right now. So I'm kind of like making this up, but I think it's like 30 to 40% that they end up winning.
Interesting. And is India like a big market for you guys?
Well, it depends. So India is not a huge market for us. We don't sell SaaS software to Indian companies for the most part.
Is there a reason for that?
We've struggled with it. We've kind of looked at it a little bit. Some of it is the price point. The company's oriented around selling software at a price point that often Indian businesses look at that and they're like, I don't want to pay that much money for software. And we're not set up to sell software at a price point that would make sense for a lot of Indian businesses. It's just hard if your cost structure is set up around this price point to sell at a very different one and make it work.
Makes sense.
So that's probably the main reason. But India is a very important market for us for a number of reasons. One is just there's an enormous employee base that we have in India. One, but two, India is one of the biggest markets for our global products. So we weirdly, I think we have a great sort of payroll and HR system for Indian employees. So I run payroll for everyone that works for Rippling in India. There's roughly 700 or so employees, and I run payroll in Rippling, and it manages payroll, benefits, food coupons, like all that kind of stuff for our employees in Bangalore. And we sell that product actually usually primarily to non-Indian businesses that have employees in India. And India is obviously one of our most popular sort of countries for that global product. So businesses all around the world, have offices and locations in India. So I think the top one for us is Canada, because we're headquartered in the U.S. and there's a lot of
U.S. Canada,
U.S. Canada. But then I think India is number two, and then after that it's the U.K. and then Australia and sort of France, Germany, places like that.
Digressing here, but sometimes I go on Twitter, right, and there'll be this like really young kid who points at a founder and is like, hey, this founder's made a mistake, or this founder's not doing well, or this company's going to die. And when I was young, I was like, oh, that's interesting insight, right? But as I've gotten older, I was like, it's like 3 seconds to put out a tweet, but building a company takes like 5-6 years. And having built companies myself and having been through like really, really hard times, and it's just hard running a company. I can't imagine what it would have been like to run a company and then have to move out of that one and do it again. Yeah. So are you comfortable talking about the Zenefits story and everything that transpired there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I it's not the most fun, but definitely like happy to jump into it.
Yeah. Is there an insight you had towards the end of Zenefits where you're like, you would have done things differently?
I think there are a few things. The biggest one was just like very unrelated to the headlines around Zenefits, and like in a lot of ways like probably sort of boring and unexciting. But one of the big mistakes that we made was that early on at Zenefits, I think that the insight that we had was that companies had before Zenefits, businesses had in the United States multiple different systems related to HR. So they would have an HR system, but then separately they need to enroll employees in a bunch of different lines of health insurance, like medical. In the US, like the way this works is medical benefits are provided directly by your employer. Mm-hmm. Dental, vision, life, disability, but then also retirement, what would be pensions in India. Provident funds is something called a 401k in the United States. And these were all just completely separate systems that people would manage. And we sort of said, look, we're going to give you one button that you click to hire someone, and we're going to send out offer letters, employment agreements, get all the right documents signed. And then we're going to set them up with all of these different systems and all of this different access and all these different benefits. And you just have like one button that you need to click to sort of make this happen. And that was, this like, and by the way, it's going to be free because we make all this money sort of on the insurance side. And we had sort of uncovered this like great kind of like product market fit. And everything worked so well for us. Like we would just, the company that I did before Zenefits, nothing ever worked for us. Like we would try and find a way to get customers, and we would have 5 or 6 things that we would try that we were sure these would have to work. There was no way that this wouldn't work, and they would all fail except for like one of them that would kind of like sort of half, maybe kind of like a little bit.
So Zenefits had product market fit.
Yeah, and then at Zenefits everything that we tried would work. And it was almost like too easy to get new customers. And the big fear that we had was that actually it was so easy that there were all these other companies that started pivoting into our space that were like, okay, these guys have found something that works. And so everyone was sort of moving into that area.
Every B2B founder in India at some point has said, I'll build a Zenefits for India.
Is that right? Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
So only those circles, like Zenefits for India, it's an open opportunity.
Yeah. So everyone sort of started moving in the space. We thought, look, the only way, what we have to do is we have to take all the oxygen out of the room. So we have to suck up all the demand, find every customer, get bigger faster than all of these other sort of second movers that are moving quickly into the space. Because at some level of scale, there will be some network effects to this business. But if we sort of take it slow, if we don't put the gas pedal all the way to the floor, then like someone else is going to be the one to kind of get to that scale. We're going to lose this thing that we sort of stumbled upon. And so one of the critical decisions that I made early on that was really a mistake in retrospect was where you said, look, we need to scale the commercial activities of the company ahead of the underlying engineering capabilities. And so we said, all of these companies there's this big administrative burden that they have managing all these different systems. We're just going to take that administrative burden on. We're going to kind of do things manually for them behind the scenes, and we'll work to sort of automate it over time. And the problem is that we ended up scaling up this sort of manual operation to sort of handle a lot of these internal business ops administrative issues.
And then there were a lot of people, and then people is liability.
People just are they let you down there. It's hard. People make mistakes. So you can't, our clients were expecting like a software system that was flawless. And instead there was human error behind the scenes. And that led to this sort of sense in the market that like, the idea behind Zenefits is great, but man, there's just a lot of execution problems. And once that became the conventional wisdom about the company, sort of everything that was working so well for us, top of funnel, it all disappeared and went away. And it happened at like exactly the wrong moment, right after we'd raised a huge amount of money at a very high price. And so we were, growth was collapsing. We were upside down on gross margins because of how expensive it was to have all of these people doing this sort of manual ops work. And it was all at the right time. And it was in that context that I think, a lot of this sort of stuff about, compliance started coming out. And I think, like the investors really used that as sort of an excuse to sort of say, like maybe let's like switch things up, get rid of Parker, or see if someone else, see if the COO, the sort of, old hand at this can come in and sort of like.
And that was David Sachs.
That was David, yeah. And I mean, it didn't work very well for them. Like David, I think sort of was kind of like the dog that catches the car and then like doesn't know what to do with it, and sort of like suddenly he was running the company, which is I think what he wanted to be doing or what he thought he wanted to be doing, but then sort of like lost interest and kind of ran the thing into the ground. And then from there, he moved on about a year and a half later. And in the meantime, I sort of said, look, once I left it, I felt like David was making all the wrong decisions. He cut all the wrong product initiatives. He, fired all the wrong people. He promoted all the wrong people. And I sort of was like, this thing is not going to work. And so I started with Prasanna, who was one of, my sort of close colleagues at Zenefits, started Rippling and said, look, this is an extension of what we were trying to do at Zenefits. And at Zenefits, the idea was, all-in-one HR software, giving employers one place to go to deal with all this HR stuff. And sort of towards the end of my time at Zenefits, I kind of had this realization that for the same reason that employers wanted one system to kind of manage all the HR stuff, they actually wanted one system for much more than that. And I started realizing that fundamentally employee data and the employee record, it was actually like a primitive for a lot of business software. That there were all these areas that we don't think of as HR, where employee data was critical to the operation of these software systems. It was any system with permissions. Those permissions are much more powerful if they can be role-based permissions. Any system with reporting and analytics. Anytime you're looking at business data of any kind, you want to cut and slice and dice that data by role. You want to look at it by department, by manager, by work location. You want to filter out your interns and drill down on this specific kind of area and look at it by tenure and And so you're constantly taking business data from all these other systems and joining it back to the underlying employee data. And that's actually one of the things that I think makes analytics systems very powerful. Anytime you have approvals, who needs to approve something for an employee? Well, first of all, it depends on who they are. VPs need different approvals than
it's complicated, and you get to simplify it with software.
Yeah, and well, it's not just that you simplify it with software, it's that this mixing in of this understanding of who your employees are and their job and role and function simplifies and allows you to build better products in all of these different unrelated areas. You build better IT software, better finance software, maybe someday even like better sales software.
Interesting. And I picked up a piece of startup gold from there. You have to tell me whether it's gold. You found PMF. I mean, you spent years not finding PMF, and you tried everything. Then you tried the same things, but you had PMF and it worked. And then you had this realization that, well, if we don't pull all demand and bring it here, somebody else is going to eat that market.
Yeah.
Is that always true? You get PMF, and then you have to hit the accelerator, raise money, capture all the demand, or do you give away pieces of your market to other people?
Well, I think so. What I was talking about, I left off the second part of the story, which is, the thing that we did differently at Riplane was the opposite. We said, look, we're gonna take a much longer time to build this, but when we build it, it's going to be software end to end. And so, for a long time, the company was, basically me and mostly a whole bunch of really sizable engineering team, 40 or 50 engineers, getting this to the point where, everything sort of worked really well and was software end to end. And then, and then things took off from there. I think that like what I got wrong at Zenefits is that, the market didn't turn over as quickly as I expected. We thought Zenefits was really competing with insurance brokers in the United States. And we thought that the entire market, the insurance brokerage market, was going to turn over in 5 years, that it would be like, in the US, there used to be, when you wanted to book travel, you'd go and you'd talk to a travel agent, you pick up the phone and call someone, and they would book your travel for you. And then, of course, things moved online, and travel agents basically disappeared in favor of online services. And we thought the same thing was going to happen with insurance brokers, and it was going to happen very, very quickly. And it happened, first of all, it hasn't happened, but to the extent that there was a transition, it was much slower than I initially expected. And so we probably could have taken the time to sort of like really focus on the software and the R&D investment for a little longer and get it right and sort of nail it before scaling up the sales and marketing machine.
And the only reason you hit the pedal there was because you thought competition was inbound.
Yeah, I mean, I had, the psychology of it is that I had seen so many years of failure that suddenly when something was working, it was like, oh my God, is this thing going to sort of slip from my grasp? You need to go after it and grab it. And I think a lot of founders who know that struggle, who have seen, like how hard it is to get something to work, suddenly have just like some combination of desperation and appreciation for things suddenly.
And fear that you lose it.
And fear of what it could be if it slips away. And so I think I don't know Travis well, but I'm told that like that was a lot of like Travis's sort of psychology at Uber.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a powerful motivator for second time founders.
Not losing the market.
Yeah.
Parker, you've done things multiple times, right? Like you now had 2 success stories. And I think what you were when you were maybe 20 and today, there might be a lot of changes, a lot of things you've learned. But also what I've come to learn is to make $1 million, you need to be the kind of person who can make $1 million, right? To run $1 billion company multiple times, there's a way you think that other people don't. And I'm sure you have wisdom that's inside that head that is different from conventional wisdom, right? Where you disagree with a VC on certain points, let's say, or you disagree with other founders on certain points. Is there a framework you have? Like if I had to ask you, what is Parker Conrad's set of secrets right? Or differences from the average person that's made him who he is today, what would you put that down as? And the easy way to ask this question is, you've seen that meme where there's this guy and there's like he's surrounded by thousands of swords. And the question is, what's an opinion you have that other people would, be like this? Like they'd come up and hold a sword to your throat. Like one of these, for example, is the fact that you don't believe in the idea of radical focus anymore.
Yeah, or it's not that I think that I don't believe in focus. It's that I think that there are opportunities that we miss, because of this assumption that you have to start with something very narrow. That's probably the thing that was like sort of the most kind of heterodox viewpoint that I had around how to build these businesses, like when Rippling was getting started. I think I'm trying to think like, what else do I like disagree with people on?
It could also be differences in your life, right?
Yeah.
For example, I met this one founder who's like, the secret of my success is I don't eat carbohydrates, which is, it probably doesn't apply to everybody else.
Sucks.
It's probably very unique to him, right?
Life's not worth living at that point.
Yeah, it's probably very unique to him. But I'm like, this is an open space.
So I can think of a few things. I'm very skeptical of the idea of like investor value add in companies. I think that most investor involvement is actually very dangerous for companies. Just because I think it's dangerous to have people who are incredibly smart and capable, who have like a few hours a quarter of context about your company, like that almost never goes well. Like their opinions are almost always wrong. So like my preference is for like as little investor involvement as possible. Like I think VCs generally talk about how you want to pick great investors that are going to help you, and like I think that's like a very scary prospect of like of having that. So that's probably one area of disagreement. Although I love my current investors at Rippling, and I think they're great. Another thing is I'm like skeptical of being like too like data driven at organizations. Like I tend to think that like it's really hard to figure out what's going on like top down looking at dashboards. And actually I think that like anecdata tends to be a lot more powerful than data.
Which is anecdote plus data.
Yeah, usually just anecdotes, actually. Like I think that if you want to know if something's going wrong in sales and you want to know what's going wrong in sales, usually like you could stare at any number of dashboards and you'd never figure it out. And the right thing to do is actually probably to go like sit in on the next 10 to 20 sales calls with prospective customers. And like, you're going to know exactly what's wrong at that point. And if something's not working in support, you need to go read the last sort of 10 or 15 support interactions and see like what happened. If there's an ops process that's broken, you need to go sit and do it like as the ops person for a day, and figure out like, why is this like screwed up? And the reason that like data is sort of often unsatisfying is like, when you have data, it shows you to the answers to the questions that you know to ask. And when things are broken, it's usually broken because there's something that you don't, it's the sort of unknown unknowns that cause problems.
It's not captured in the data.
It's not captured in the data. Because it's, you're not looking at that specific thing. It's not instrumented in that particular way. And so you need to go look at like individual like anomalies and sort of like, and then you sort of look at a few of them and you immediately understand what's going on. And so that's another sort of piece of conventional wisdom that I think I generally disagree with. I'm trying to think what else. I think that like, I probably tend to, like one thing, I don't know how like different this is, but like I tend to be very skeptical of like trade-offs. Inside the company, like people will often come to me and do what I call like CEO in a box, where they'll say like, okay, you can have like A or B, like which one do you want, like A or B? And often these trade-offs are framed as like speed versus quality, or speed versus feature completeness, or something like that. And my response is usually when I get that like A versus B trade-off is to say like, wait, hold on, like time out. I want both A and B. Like, why can I not have A and B? And usually what's happening is like the person that's bringing you that decision is actually making the decision for you. They're deciding that like these are the constraints that they're imposing on the problem and giving you sort of the illusion of choice. When usually like you can sort of say, look, where is it written that A and B cannot coexist? You know, where like does it violate the second law of thermodynamics? Like what's the reason that you can't have these two things at the same time? And often you can find like a third path. Like you can find a different approach. You can find a way to get both of them. Speed versus quality is like my favorite one because like I have seen many engineering teams that move slowly. I have never known them to build high quality products. But everyone believes that like secretly, everyone believes that like it's like speed versus quality is this thing. And it's almost always like moving slow is almost always correlated with like very low quality outputs at the same time. Yeah. Definitely people can move fast and build bad products, but like almost never is like moving slowly like the answer to like building high quality things.
Interesting. Last question, right? And this is on talent management. I find it hard, like in the past, to run like a 40, 50 man org, right? You have what, like 1,000 employees? Like what's the
about 2,500. 2,500
employees. How do you hire people? What's your framework? What are your red flags?
So most of the time when I'm hiring someone, it's usually someone in an executive role. And so, you know, there are different ways. I think there are different things that are appropriate for hiring people at different levels. But usually what I do when I'm hiring an exec is I'll send them a bunch of material about the company. Stuff that I prepared, for investors, for,
And you've written those things?
Yeah. So there's usually like once a year I sit down and write an investor memo that's sort of like almost like the manifesto for the company. Like what are we doing? Why? How does the business work? What's the strategy? And I usually I have written that memo and like often like not used it to raise money because like, we weren't raising money that year. And instead it ends up like being used almost exclusively for recruiting.
Do those memos get leaked to the media and stuff?
We actually published the first one. And I don't think the subsequent ones I don't think have leaked, and we haven't published them. We send them out pretty broadly to prospective candidates.
You don't mind if your competitors see it?
Yeah, and I think we're sort of there was a point where I realized like at first we were like very secretive about it, and there was a point where I realized like, you know what, if other people see this, competitors, like there's nothing that they can do about it. And so like it's actually okay, like even if it leaks. But I'll send them all that material and we'll set up a call. And generally I'll say like, look, I have no agenda, I have no questions for you. It's really like this is your chance to sort of ask me about the company and the business and the role. And we'll just sort of start a conversation. And generally what I'm looking for is I want to learn something in the course of that conversation. So like the best interviews are things where people like, they have, first of all, usually very smart questions. And the smart questions are like, the really bad ones are the ones that start off where people are just kind of like, how are you so amazing? Like you built such an amazing company. And like that, it's like sort of like, okay, that's not, that person's probably not going to work out. But the really good people are people that can really get right to the sort of central issues on like, well, it's interesting, they sort of say, look, it's interesting how you're thinking about this, but how do you handle this problem? And like, isn't it going to break because of this reason? And these are usually things that I've thought about before. And so, I have answers to like sort of those central questions. But like, I also know that they're like the right objections versus like there are stupid objections and there are smart objections. And some people get right to the really smart objections. And we have a conversation about that. And often, like in those conversations, like I'll learn something new, or they'll have advice, you know, about sort of, you know, if I'm interviewing someone for like, I don't know, engineering, they'll have a point of view on the engineering side around some of the challenges and how you might address them. And sometimes I'll be like, whoa, like that's a really smart point. And so, and generally, if I learn something from them, that's almost always like someone that I want to hire.
So it's like you put out a document where you're like, hey, here's what the company does, here are my expectations. And then what you're judging execs for when you're hiring them is clarity of thought.
So yeah, I think that's right. And like, can they challenge me on my thinking? And do I learn something about sort of, you know, how their function should operate from that conversation? And some people, and then also, like, you know, everyone's going to start out. They're not going to totally. I mean, I've spent a lot more time thinking about this than they have. So they usually are going to have questions. And some people in the course of that conversation, they're sort of like completing my sentences. They're kind of like, oh, you know, they're like, oh yeah, and that means this, or they see the implications, you know, where they're like, oh, okay, if that's true, then also this and also that, and that means that the following, and they just get it really quickly. And it's sort of, I think those people tend to be very successful, because that's actually the most natural interaction that we're going to have.
And you're hiring execs for judgment anyway.
That's right. You know, you want people where sort of like they're gonna immediately sort of like fit into a groove and get in a groove and sort of understand, you know, get beyond, you know, you want people who are going to see ahead of you on this stuff. Like once they come, they're going to pick it up and they're going to see sort of around the corner on this. And so you want people that in that first conversation, that tends to be kind of how they're operating.
And any red flags when you're hiring execs? We're like, that's a no-go.
Red flags. Usually people who are kind of, you know, the first conversation, they, you know, want to know about work-life balance, or, you know, like, so, you know, there's like that's sort of usually like, not that, you know, that's not a thing, but if that, you know, that's probably not the first conversation. I have this theory, by the way, that like actually, that like that one of the sort of interesting ways to judge a company is if you look at Glassdoor reviews, they're like highly correlated with sort of people's answers on work-life balance.
What does that mean? I mean, could you explain it in a simpler way for the audience? The Glassdoor reviews and the...
There's a score that is on Glassdoor for the company as a whole, and there's a score for work-life balance. And I think that actually the best companies are ones where the difference between those two scores is really telling, because there's a high correlation between those scores. But I think you want to work for companies where sort of like the you know, that the company rating is much higher than the work-life balance. You know, that people are like, look, the company's like working really well in comparison to like the amount of work that it is to be there.
Yeah, it's a nice place to work, but hey, you can't expect perfect work-life balance.
Yeah, it's like, look, you know, I think you want companies to be like, you want it to be livable. Like, you know, I have 3 kids. I take my kids to school every morning. You know, read them a story at night before they go to bed. But also, like, I think you want to work somewhere where there's some ambition and there are other people with sort of a chip on their shoulder that want to get something done. You know, like we're not, you know, no one's here on this planet forever. And like, you know, it's a short time that we have, and I think you want to try and accomplish something. And sometimes people think that they want to work at a company where there's really good work-life balance. And a lot of times people end up at those companies, they don't like it. And the problem is like you end up at that company and, you know, everyone else around you doesn't give a shit. You know, they're kind of phoning it in. And that ends up being really frustrating. You know, if you're someone who's motivated and ambitious, like you want to be somewhere where your colleagues are all, you know, really care. You know,
and you have a sense of purpose.
Yeah, exactly. And that, look, it can be a lot of work, but also very inspiring and engaging and exciting at the same time when you have an environment like that.
Yeah. One last thing I picked up from this conversation is you seem to write a lot. Is there like a correlation between quality writing and, general startup success?
I don't know. I don't know if I like, I find it really hard and painful to write. I think that like doing the investor memo thing, like frequently what happens is like the business gets ahead of like the last memo. And so like the last memo is kind of out of date now because like things have evolved and there's more to the story than what's reflected there. And so I get a lot of pressure from my team to like update it. And it just like, it takes like months for me to like do it. I'm supposed to be doing one right now.
How many pages is the memo?
I use about like 20 pages or so. And like I was supposed to be doing it on the flight over. I was supposed to be doing it while I'm here, in Bangalore and have some downtime. I've done absolutely nothing, and like, and the reason is like you sit there and you kind of like stare at the screen and until your eyes start to bleed and like, and suddenly, and hopefully like the memo comes out. And I find it like very, very difficult. And so usually there's sort of like a long, like months of that until finally it's like there's some deadline and I only have like this weekend to finish.
It's college all over again.
Yeah, and it all comes out in like this sort of like torrid, like manic, sort of like heavily caffeinated weekend of just like locking myself in a room and like, sort of sitting there until. So that's like the only way that I found to write. So I don't think of myself as particularly good at it. I think of it as like extremely painful. And then eventually, it just kind of, you squeeze it out somehow.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Parker. I think I learned a lot. I think I learned a little more on how I should probably run a company when I do it next. And I think that I'm sure that the people who've stayed so far have learned a lot. Do you have any last message for them before we bid adieu?
For like listeners, I'm trying to think. I think Rippling is a really special company in ways that are not evident from the outside. Because I think Rippling looks like, from the outside, like an HR software company. And a lot of people are like, ugh, HR software, that's boring. And I think people shouldn't think of it that way. We're really saying like, look, we have like a fundamentally new approach to how you should build software. And employee data is like a fundamental building block of sort of, I think, how a lot of software should be built. And so I think that like, particularly for many of your listeners, like they should check us out and come see if it might be a good fit.
Awesome. If you're in India and you're looking for a job and you have been in the startup ecosystem, where do they go? Rippling.com/jobs?
There's a career. I don't even know what the URL is, but
careers.
Yeah, Rippling.
If you're smart enough, figure it out.
You'll figure out in the footer. There's a link there. We're hiring tons of people, growing very aggressively.
How many people are you hiring in India? Do you have a rough number?
I know that on the engineering side, we're hiring roughly 100 people in Bangalore next year. But then we're also hiring sales and marketing, product design. We're hiring finance, customer support.
It's about 200, 300 jobs at minimum, guys.
Yeah.
Go get it.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you, Parker. And
cool.
I hope you had fun.
Thanks a bunch. That was fun.